And please tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I would love to interact with you legends. Now to the story. You know how sometimes you match with someone and you think, all right, maybe this could actually be normal for once. That was exactly how it felt in my match with Amy. Her profile looked pretty simple, nothing over the top, and she had this sarcastic kind of humor in her bio that made me think she'd be down to earth. We didn't talk too long before deciding to meet up, because honestly, I've learned the hard way that dragging out endless texting usually leads to nothing. She suggested coffee, and I figured perfect, low-key, no pressure. We met at this small cafe near campus. It wasn't anything fancy like $3 for a cup kind of place, which I didn't mind at all. Amy showed up looking exactly like her pictures, which was already a win in my book because half the time people don't. She had this big smile, and at first everything seemed cool. We ordered, and I went up to pay, but she kind of jumped in and said we should split it. It caught me a little off guard because, it was like $7 total, but I shrugged it off. Some people like doing that, and I wasn't about to argue over coffee. The conversation itself was fine. Not amazing, not awful, just fine. We talked about school, random movies we both liked, some stuff about where we grew up. She did this thing where she kept checking her phone every 5 minutes, though, and it started to feel like she was only half there. I figured maybe she was busy or she wasn't into it, whatever. The date ended pretty quick, maybe an hour tops, and when we left, she gave me a quick hug and said it was fun. I didn't think much of it after. Then later that night, I was scrolling on my phone, and a buddy of mine sent me a screenshot from Twitter. There she was, Amy, posting about me. She had taken screenshots of my Tinder profile, my pictures and everything, and wrote this whole post about how broke I must be because we split the bill on a cheap coffee date. She even made some sarcastic comment about how men these days can't even cover $3 without crying. At first, I just laughed because the whole thing was so ridiculous. Like, she was the one who insisted we split. But the more I thought about it, the more it annoyed me. She made it look like I refused to pay, when in reality I didn't even care about the cost. I just went with what she wanted. The part that really got me, though, was the fact she was bragging online about it, like she got some kind of win out of the situation. The weirdest part was seeing the comments under her post. Some people were hyping her up, agreeing with her, saying I sounded cheap. But then others were calling her out, pointing out that she was the one pushing for splitting, and that posting screenshots of someone's profile after a single coffee date was petty. I didn't jump in or defend myself because, honestly, I didn't want to add fuel to it, but it stuck in my head for a while. What really got me thinking was how performative dating feels sometimes. Like she wasn't interested in me as a person, she was just looking for a story to post online. Instead of just saying, hey, not feeling it, she needed to turn it into content. I don't know if she does that with everyone she meets, but judging by how quick she posted, it almost felt like she planned it from the start. After that, I deleted her number and unmatched her. Not because I was mad, but because I didn't want to be part of whatever show she was trying to put on. I figured if someone can take something as small as a coffee and turn it into a whole attack on your character, it's not worth the effort. And honestly, the whole thing was kind of funny to tell my friends about later. They started calling it the $3 scandal, and it became a running joke for a while. I never saw her again after that, except one time a couple weeks later when she popped up on my feed again because another friend retweeted one of her posts. Same energy, just dragging some other guy for something dumb. At that point, I just realized that was probably her thing. Not dating, not meeting people, just collecting stories to post and get reactions from strangers. It's kind of crazy how you can meet someone in person and they act mostly normal, but then online they're this completely different version of themselves, like two sides of a coin. In person she was smiling, splitting the bill, saying it was fun. Online she was roasting me like I had just committed some huge crime against humanity. In the end, I wasn't even mad. It was just another one of those weird dating app stories you end up stacking in the back of your mind. The kind you pull out when people start talking about bad dates and you can say, oh yeah, I had a girl blast me online over a $3 coffee. It makes for a good laugh, and honestly, I'd rather laugh about it than stress over someone I barely knew. The girl who turned a cheap coffee into an online rant for strangers to debate over. And me. I was just the guy in the middle of it, sipping my coffee, wondering what the hell happened. It's funny how when you first meet someone, your brain can trick you into thinking they're perfect. That was me with Jackson. The first time I saw his profile, I thought this guy has it all. He had good pictures, nothing fake looking. Just him out with friends, and with a dog, him on a hike. His bio was short but clever, like he wasn't trying too hard, which honestly made him stand out. We matched fast and started talking, and everything just flowed. He was quick with jokes, actually asked me questions instead of just giving one-word answers, and didn't vanish mid-conversation like most people do. When we set up our first date, it felt natural. We went for tacos at this food truck near downtown, and the night couldn't have gone smoother. He paid for everything. We walked around after, and I remember thinking I'd hit some kind of jackpot. He was charming, easy to talk to, even seemed genuinely interested in what I was saying instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. By the end of the night, I was already thinking about a second date, which for me is rare because I usually keep my guard up. So when we planned the second one, I didn't even hesitate. He suggested a small bar that had live music on Thursdays, and I figured why not. The place was dim, crowded but not overwhelming, with this low buzz of people chatting over the band playing in the corner. He was already there when I arrived, sitting with a drink in his hand and a big smile on his face. I sat down, and right away things felt comfortable again. At first, it was the same vibe as the first night. Easy conversation. Jokes, that smooth way he had of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. But then, halfway through the night, the mood shifted. Out of nowhere, he leaned in and started telling me something in his casual tone, like it was no big deal. He said he only used Tinder to meet people so he could secretly record the dates and post them on private forums. He laughed while saying it, like it was supposed to be funny, like I'd just laugh along with him. I sat there trying to process it. At first, I thought maybe he was joking, but the way he explained it made my stomach sink. He talked about how he had this hidden setup, little cameras, or even just recording audio, and then he'd shared online in groups where people would watch and comment. He made it sound like some kind of twisted hobby. The way he described it was so casual, like he was talking about collecting baseball cards or something. I felt this wave of discomfort wash over me, but I tried not to show it right away. I kept nodding like I was listening, but my mind was racing. Suddenly, I started thinking back to our first date. Did he record that too? Was that already floating around online somewhere as part of his little collection? The thought made me feel sick, but I didn't want to cause a scene in the middle of the bar. What threw me off the most was how confident he was about it. He wasn't whispering, he wasn't acting guilty. He was just throwing it out there like it was something cool he did, almost like he was proud of it. He even mentioned that people online loved it when he got good reactions out of his dates, like when they laughed a certain way or got emotional. It was beyond creepy. After that, I couldn't really focus. He kept talking, but I was just staring at him, wondering how I could have missed all these red flags. On the surface, he looked so normal. He wasn't awkward. He didn't give off weird vibes at first, and that's what made it so unsettling. You expect people with dark secrets to at least show some signs, but he didn't. He was smooth, charismatic, and that's exactly what made it dangerous. I told him I wasn't feeling great and cut the night short. He didn't seem bothered, just shrugged and said we'd hang out again soon. On the way out, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe he was already recording me that night too. Every glance at my phone, every sip of my drink, it all suddenly felt staged, like I was on camera without knowing it. When I got home, I sat there replaying everything in my head. I read his texts from the past week, trying to see if there were hints I'd missed. There weren't. He was normal in messages, just like he was in person at first. That's what scared me most, how easy it was for him to hide it. The next morning, I had matched him and blocked his number. I didn't even bother confronting him because I knew it wouldn't go anywhere. If he could talk so openly about doing it, he clearly didn't care about what was right or wrong. I kept wondering if I should tell someone or report him somehow, but the truth is I didn't even know where to start. What proof did I have? It was just something he said on a date. Still, it left me feeling uneasy for weeks. Every time I went out after that, I found myself scanning the room, wondering if someone had a camera set up. It made me second-guess who I was sitting across from, like anyone could be hiding something under the surface. Dating apps already feel like a gamble, but this made it feel like the stakes were way higher than I thought. Looking back, I think what hit me hardest was how ordinary he seemed. He wasn't some shady-looking guy hiding in the shadows. He was the kind of guy you bring to a party and your friends would say, "Oh yeah, he seems great." And meanwhile, behind that, he was turning people's lives into some twisted form of entertainment. I'd never heard from him again after blocking him, but sometimes I still think about it. I wonder how many people he's done that to, how many nights like mine got posted online without anyone knowing. It's one of those things you can't prove, but the thought lingers. And that was Jackson, the guy who seemed perfect until he opened his mouth and revealed he wasn't looking for connection, just content. The weirdest part about dating apps is how sometimes you swipe without even thinking and end up matching with someone who looks like they just popped out of nowhere. That's exactly how it felt my match with Halima. I don't even remember swiping right, but there she was in my matches. Her pictures looked put together like she'd spent some time making sure everything looked clean and professional. She had that type of profile where you couldn't really tell much about her personality, just some generic quotes and a picture of her standing next to a car that probably wasn't even hers. Still, she was cute, and I figured, why not? I'll give it a shot. We didn't talk too much before deciding to meet. She wasn't really into long conversations, just quick back and forth stuff. The way she messaged gave me the vibe that she didn't care about building anything before meeting in person, so I figured maybe she liked old school style, where you just meet and figure it out. She picked a restaurant in the city, nothing too fancy, but definitely prettier than what I usually go for on a first date. It was one of those places with dim lighting, shiny menus, and a bar taking up half the space. When I walked in, she was already sitting at a table near the bar. She looked the same as her pictures, maybe a little more tired, but still put together. She smiled when she saw me, but it felt kind of forced, like she was more interested in the night itself than in me being there. I sat down, and right away she started talking about how she always orders cocktails when she's out. She waved the waiter over before I even had time to open the menu and ordered herself something fancy. When the waiter turned to me, I just asked for a soda. That was the moment everything shifted. She gave me this look, like I had just insulted her by not ordering alcohol. At first, I thought she was joking, but she leaned in and said she couldn't believe I was drinking soda on a date. I brushed it off and said I just didn't feel like drinking, but she kept pushing, asking if I always avoided alcohol or if it was just a cheap thing. I told her no, I just wasn't in the mood. The way her face dropped, you'd think I had just confessed to something awful. The rest of the meal was strange. She kept bringing it up, making little comments about how boring soda was, how people who don't drink are usually uptight, how she thought dates were supposed to be about loosening up and having fun. She ordered a second drink before the food even came, and by the time we were halfway through eating, she was already on her third. Her words started to slur just a bit, and she got louder, laughing at her own jokes while everyone around us turned to look. I tried to keep the conversation light, asking her about her job, her hobbies, anything that might steer her away from the obsession with drinking. But no matter what topic I brought up, she always circled back to alcohol. She talked about her favorite bars, how she loved guys who could keep up with her shots, how her ex couldn't drink as much as she could, and how that was one of the reasons she broke it off. She said it proudly, like it was something to brag about. By the end of the meal, she had finished 4 cocktails. She wasn't completely wasted, but she was buzzing enough that the waiter gave me a subtle look when dropping off the check, like he felt sorry for me. I paid for my soda and half the food, but she insisted on covering the drinks because that's her thing. I didn't argue. Honestly, I was just ready for the night to end. When we walked out of the restaurant, she gave me this big grin and said she'd text me later. I nodded, not planning to follow up. I figured that was it. Just another bad date to throw onto the pile. But a couple hours later, my phone buzzed. It was Halima. She sent me this long text about how she couldn't date someone who didn't drink. She said people who don't drink are flat and don't have a real personality. She said drinking shows who people really are and that sober people are basically fake. I sat there staring at my phone, rereading it a couple times because it sounded so ridiculous. She was seriously trying to convince me that alcohol equals personality. I didn't even respond. There wasn't anything to say. If that's how she measured people, then she wasn't for me, plain and simple. I muted the chat and let it die there. Still, it stuck in my head for a while. Not because I cared about her opinion, but because I couldn't wrap my mind around someone making drinking the entire foundation of what they wanted in a partner. It wasn't about kindness, goals, humor, or any of the usual stuff. It was just do you drink or not. That was a deal breaker for her. A week later, one of my friends told me he'd matched with her too. He showed me her profile, and I laughed because it was the exact same pictures, the same boring quotes. He asked if I knew anything about her, and I just said, yeah, she really likes to drink. He read my face and knew there was more to it, but I didn't bother telling the whole story. He figured it out soon enough if he went on a date with her. The thing that keeps replaying in my mind is that first look she gave me when I ordered the soda. Like she instantly made up her mind about me in that split second. Not because of my personality, not because of how the conversation was going, but because I didn't have alcohol in front of me. That's the kind of person she was, and honestly, it says more about her than it ever could about me. The girl who measured personality by the number of drinks someone could handle. The one who thought soda was a sign of weakness, and that drinking was the ultimate proof of being fun. The whole thing started on a Wednesday night when I was just mindlessly swiping, not even looking for anything serious. You know how it goes. You're half watching something on TV, half scrolling, and suddenly you match with someone. That's how Mark popped up. His profile wasn't anything crazy, just some regular pictures of him eating at restaurants and one of him with a dog. His bio was short, basically just saying he liked trying new food spots and hanging out. Nothing stood out, but nothing was off either. We started chatting, and he seemed normal. He asked what kind of food I liked, cracked a few jokes, and then asked if I wanted to grab dinner sometime. Honestly, I wasn't expecting much, but he picked a decent restaurant downtown, and I figured why not. When I got there, Mark was already sitting at the table. He was wearing a button-down shirt, neat haircut, pretty put together. He smiled when I walked in, and at first, I thought maybe this would actually be a chill night. We ordered, started talking about random stuff, and it was smooth. He talked about his job, asked about mine, and I was thinking this could be one of the rare normal dates. But then, halfway through dinner, things started to unravel. He casually mentioned that he still lives with his ex. I froze for a second, thinking maybe I misheard him. But no, he said it again, like it was no big deal. He explained that they broke up months ago, but neither of them had moved out yet because the lease wasn't up. I sat there trying to stay calm, but the whole situation sounded messy already. Before I could even ask questions, he leaned in and told me what he wanted. He said he wanted me to pretend to be his new partner so his ex would get jealous. He started explaining this whole plan about how if she saw him moving on, she'd feel left behind, and it would make their living situation easier because she'd supposedly stop trying to get under his skin. I just sat there in disbelief. He wasn't even shy about it. He wanted to use me as some kind of prop in his drama with his ex. The more he talked, the worse it got. He said maybe I could even come over to the apartment sometime, just to make it look more real. He said his ex was nosy and always watching what he was doing, so if I showed up, it would send a message. The whole time I was staring at him, wondering how someone could actually think this was a reasonable thing to ask on a first date. We barely knew each other. I didn't even know his middle name, and here he was trying to drag me into some soap opera he had going on at home. I tried to change the subject, but he kept circling back to it. He went into detail about how much he hated his ex, how she was manipulative, how she still acted like they were together even though they weren't. It was like he needed to vent, and I was just sitting there with my plate of food, realizing I had walked right into a therapy session I didn't sign up for. The more he talked, the clearer it became that he wasn't over her at all. Every other sentence was about something she did, how she cooked, how she decorated the place, how she texted him. I kept thinking, if she's so in his head that he's ranting about her in the middle of a date, and he's nowhere near ready to move on. I barely touched my food after that. I just wanted the night to end. When the check came, he reached for it, which was the only decent move he made the whole night, but even that felt hollow because I couldn't shake the awkwardness of what he'd said. On the way out, he asked if I wanted to hang out again. I mumbled something non-committal, just wanting to get away. He grinned like everything was fine, like he hadn't just spent the last hour asking me to play pretend in his weird relationship drama. When I got home, I sat there thinking about how surreal the night was. Most bad dates are boring, maybe awkward, but at least they're straightforward. This one felt like I had accidentally stepped into someone else's storyline. It was like being cast in a role without knowing the script. The next morning, he texted me. He said he had fun and that he was serious about me helping him out with the ex situation. He even joked about how it would be fun to mess with her. I didn't respond. I let the message sit there, unread, until I eventually just blocked his number. I couldn't stop imagining what would have happened if I had said yes. I'd be showing up at some random apartment while his ex was there, probably dealing with dirty looks and drama I had nothing to do with. The thought alone made me cringe. A few weeks later, I told the story to a group of friends, and they couldn't stop laughing. One of them said it sounded like something out of a bad reality show. Another said I should have gone along with it just to see how far it would go, but honestly, that was the last thing I wanted. Being used as a pawn in someone else's breakup wasn't my idea of fun. What really stuck with me, though, was how casual he was about it. He didn't see it as weird or inappropriate. To him, it was just a plan, like asking someone to help you move or water your plants. It made me wonder how many other people he might have pitched this idea to before me. Maybe I wasn't even the first. I wasn't even planning on going out that week. I had too much going on with work and honestly wasn't in the mood for another awkward first meet that ended up being a waste of time. But then I matched with Olivia. She had this one photo that caught my eye, her sitting on a rooftop patio with string lights in the background, hair kind of messy like she didn't care. Something about it just felt real compared to the polished selfies everyone else posted. Her bio was short but not corny, and she messaged me first, which was rare. She said something about how I looked like I was pretending not to enjoy life in one of my pictures, and it actually made me laugh. We chatted for a couple of days, nothing deep, just jokes and random stuff about music. She didn't come off as flaky, and she seemed like she could hold a conversation without turning it into a job interview. That was enough for me to agree to meet. She suggested this little diner on the edge of town that I'd actually never been to. It wasn't fancy, just one of those spots with vinyl booths, neon signs that flickered, and an old jukebox in the corner. I liked the vibe right away. It felt easy. When I walked in, she was already sitting in a booth by the window. She waved when she saw me, and I noticed she looked a little different than her pictures. Not in a bad way, just more casual. No makeup, hair tied back, wearing a hoodie like she didn't want to make a big effort. I respected that. Sometimes dates feel like a fashion show, but she looked like she was just there to hang out. At first, everything was chill. We ordered burgers, she got a milkshake, I got a soda, and we started talking. She was funny, sarcastic, and kind of had this sharp way of looking at people. I thought, okay, this could actually go somewhere. But about 30 minutes in, things took a turn. She leaned back in her seat, grinning, and out of nowhere, she said she wasn't actually single. I must have looked confused because she laughed and clarified. She had a partner. Not an ex, not a situationship, but a full-on partner. And apparently, he lets her go on dates with other people. She said it like it was no big deal, like she was telling me her favorite color. I just sat there trying to wrap my head around it. She explained that she likes comparing how other people treat her to how her partner treats her. She said it helps her figure out if she's still being valued at home, and if not, she can bring it up. Basically, she was using dating as some kind of test run to evaluate her relationship. She even laughed about how sometimes she'd take notes afterward, like she was running an experiment. The more she talked, the more uncomfortable I got. Not because of the open relationship thing. People can do what they want, but because of the way she was treating me. I wasn't a person she was interested in. I was a measuring stick, a data point. She asked me these random pointed questions, like how often I text people back, whether I pay attention to birthdays, if I remember what kind of fries she ordered. It felt like I was being graded. At one point, she even pulled out her phone and typed something after I answered her question about family. I asked what she was doing, and she just laughed and said, "Don't worry about it." That made the whole thing worse. The food came, and I tried to keep things light, but every time I thought we were having a normal conversation, she dropped another comment about her partner. She said he was older, more established, and had been with her for years. She also said he didn't know the details of her dates, just that she was going out. That stuck in my head because it meant she wasn't being as honest with him as she made it sound. She framed it as him letting her do this, but it really felt like she was just sneaking around while telling herself it was fine. By the time we finished eating, I was drained. It didn't feel like a date. It felt like sitting in on someone's weird therapy exercise. I walked her out, and she gave me this half hug like we were old friends. She smiled and said I was sweet, which just made it worse because I knew she was probably going to go home and tell her partner about it like a report card. Later that night, she actually texted me. She thanked me for being a good sport and said she had learned a lot from our time together. I stared at the message for a while, trying to decide if I should even bother replying. In the end, I just left it. I wasn't interested in being anyone's experiment, especially not for someone who was already in a relationship. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about it. Not because I missed her or anything, but because the whole situation was so bizarre. Dating is supposed to be about connection, even if it doesn't last. With her, there was no chance of connection. It was like she built a wall before we even met, and all I was allowed to do was throw rocks at it so she could see how it held up. A friend of mine later told me that there are people who treat dating apps like games, like little social experiments. That's exactly what it felt like with Olivia. She wasn't there to meet people. She was there to test them, to collect results, and then go back to her partner with the data. I couldn't help but wonder how many people before me had sat in that same booth, answering her random questions while she secretly scored them in her head. I don't know if she ever reached out again because I muted her after that. I didn't even want to see the notifications pop up. To me, that night was just another story, another strange chapter in the mess that is dating apps. And that was Olivia, the girl who wasn't really single, who turned a date into a science experiment, and who made me feel like I was sitting for a test I never signed up for. The first time I saw Kyle's profile, I almost swiped left because the pictures looked lazy. One was a blurry bathroom mirror selfie, another was him holding up a fish, and the rest looked like screenshots from Snapchat. His bio just said he was into good food and good vibes, which sounded like something copied from a cliche list. For some reason, though, maybe out of boredom, I swiped right. A couple minutes later, we matched, and he messaged me right away. The conversation wasn't anything amazing, but he was quick to suggest we meet up. Usually, I like to talk a bit more before agreeing, but I figured I had nothing to lose. He suggested a burger place downtown that I'd been to a couple of times. It wasn't fancy, but not cheap either, one of those places where two people could easily spend $40 without trying. The night of the date, I got there first. I sat at a table near the back and waited. 15 minutes passed, then 30. I was about to leave when Kyle finally walked in, grinning like he had just won something. He didn't apologize for being late. Instead, he dropped into the chair across from me and said traffic sucked. He looked almost the same as his pictures, just a bit more worn down, like someone who hadn't slept much. Right away, he flagged down the waiter and ordered a beer before even looking at the menu. I figured maybe he was nervous, but the way he leaned back and made himself comfortable, it was clear he wasn't. He started asking me about my job, not because he was interested, but because he wanted to know how much I made. The way he phrased it was clumsy too, like he was trying to sound casual but couldn't hide the fact he was digging. When the food came, he went big. Appetizer, large burger, fries, extra sides, another drink. I stuck with something simple because I wasn't sure where the night was heading. As soon as he started eating, he relaxed even more, almost like he forgot it was a date and thought of it as dinner with himself. I asked him about his hobbies, his friends, what he'd like to do for fun. That's when he said something that stopped me cold. He told me he only uses Tinder to find people willing to take him out to eat. He laughed after saying it like it was a great punchline. He said he hadn't worked in years and that going on dates was how he got free meals. He even admitted he sometimes lined up 2 or 3 dates a week, depending on how many people swiped right on him. The confidence in his voice was unreal. He didn't even flinch while admitting it. I sat there trying to process what I just heard. He wasn't even embarrassed. He said he liked finding people who didn't mind covering the bill, because that was how he weeded out who was generous. He made it sound like some kind of twisted system, as if using people for food was a strategy instead of what it really was, taking advantage. The more he talked, the worse it got. He bragged about how some people had taken him to really nice restaurants, how he ordered the most expensive thing just to see if they'd say anything, and how he usually never texted them again afterward. He even mentioned someone who called him out, and he laughed about that like it was a funny story. Meanwhile, I was just sitting there, watching him demolish his burger and fries while sipping on his second beer, realizing I was part of the scam. I felt this mix of annoyance and disbelief. I wanted to call him out, but honestly, I just wanted the night to be over. When the check came, the waiter set it in the middle of the table. Kyle didn't even reach for it. He leaned back, stretched, and said, "You got this right," like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stared at him for a second, then slid some cash onto the table to cover my part. He looked annoyed, like I'd broken some kind of unspoken rule, and then reluctantly tossed down a couple crumpled bills that barely covered his drinks. We walked out together, but the silence was heavy. He lit a cigarette as soon as we stepped outside, and barely said goodbye before wandering off down the street. I stood there for a second, almost laughing at the absurdity of it. I'd just been on a date with someone who admitted he uses dating apps as his personal meal ticket. Later that night, I told a friend about it, and she rolled her eyes, saying she'd heard of people like that, but never met one. It made me realize that Kyle wasn't even unique. There are probably dozens of people doing the same thing, treating dates as free dinner instead of actual connections. For the next few days, I kept replaying the night in my head. The way he walked in late, the way he brimmed so casually, the way he leaned back while I covered my food. It felt less like a date and more like being tricked into participating in someone else's hustle. I'd matched him right after, of course. There was no point in keeping that line open. But for a while after, I couldn't help but wonder how many people had fallen for his act before me. How many had sat across from him at some restaurant, listening to him brag about nothing, only to be left with the bill. And that was Kyle, the guy who turned dating into his personal job, living off strangers' wallets while pretending it was all just part of good vibes. There are times when you open the app and it feels like every single profile looks the same. Same mirror selfies, same gin shots, same captions about loving to travel. I was about ready to just put my phone down when I came across Lily. Her pictures stood out, not because they were amazing quality, but because they looked like they were taken during random moments. One had her at the beach with messy hair, another at some festival with lights behind her, and one of her with a group of friends, laughing like she didn't even know the picture was being taken. It felt more genuine than the polished style I usually saw. She matched with me pretty quick, and she sent the first message. It was short, just something about how my smile looked too forced, which I actually found funny. We ended up chatting for a few days, nothing deep but enough to make me curious. She seemed easygoing, not too serious. I thought maybe this could be a fun date. She suggested we meet at a pizza place on the edge of town. I liked the idea, casual, easy, no pressure. When I walked in, though, I immediately spotted her sitting in the back, and my first reaction was confusion. She looked nothing like the pictures. Not just a little different, but almost like a completely different person. Her hair was shorter and darker, her face looked older, and she carried herself in a way that didn't match the carefree vibe of her photos. For a second, I thought maybe I'd walked up to the wrong person, but when she waved, I knew it was her. I sat down, trying not to show the shock on my face. She noticed anyway. She laughed and said, "You're surprised, huh?" That's when she told me she uses old pictures on purpose. She said it's her way of weeding out shallow people. I didn't know what to say to that. I mean, I get not wanting to be judged for looks, but there's a difference between wanting authenticity and tricking someone into thinking you look one way when you don't. She said she liked to see people's reactions to find out who was genuine and who wasn't. The problem was, instead of actually trying to connect with me after admitting it, she started mocking me. She said I looked like the type who only cared about appearances, just because I seemed surprised. The energy shifted fast. She went from being playful in our chats to being almost defensive in person. Every time I tried to steer the conversation toward normal stuff, music, shows, work, she twisted it back into some test about whether or not I was shallow. If I said I liked a band, she'd ask if I only liked them because of how they looked. If I mentioned going to the gym, she'd accuse me of being obsessed with appearances. It felt like she came into the date with a chip on her shoulder, ready to prove some point rather than actually get to know me. When the pizza came, she picked at it while going on about how most people on the app only want Instagram models. She talked like she was giving a lecture, not having a date. I sat there listening, trying not to look annoyed, but inside I was just done. I hadn't come out to be psychoanalyzed. At one point, she leaned back and asked if I would have even shown up if I had known what she really looked like. I didn't answer right away because I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to be cruel. She smirked and said, "See, that's exactly what I mean." It was like she wanted me to fail her little test. I tried to focus on the food, but even eating felt weird under her stare. She made another comment about how I was probably calculating if it was worth sticking around. That was when I realized she wasn't even interested in me as a person. She was just running some experiment she had set up in her head. When the check came, I paid my half and didn't argue. She didn't offer to split or cover hers, just sat there scrolling on her phone while I left cash on the table. We walked out together, but the vibe was dead. She gave me a quick bye and walked the other direction without even looking back. Later that night, she messaged me saying I didn't pass the test. She said I looked too shocked when I saw her, and that proved to her I was shallow. I stared at my phone, half laughing, half annoyed. She didn't care about whether we connected, didn't care about the actual conversations we had. All she cared about was how well I played into her set. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She wasn't looking for a date. She was looking for validation for her experiment. And the truth is, I wasn't even mad. I was just tired. Tired of people turning dating into some weird game instead of just being honest about who they are. A few weeks later, one of my friends said he matched with a girl who sounded exactly like her. He said she looked different from her photos too and pulled the same testing for shallow people line. That's when it hit me. She probably did this to everyone. It wasn't personal. It was just her thing. What still sticks with me, though, is that feeling when I first walked in. That split second of confusion, thinking I had the wrong person. It set the whole tone of the night, and no matter what she said after, I couldn't shake it. I kept wondering why someone would go through all that effort just to start things off on the wrong foot. The girl who used old pictures as bait turned dates into experiments, and then laughed when people reacted like normal human beings. I didn't even mean to match with Ben. It was one of those nights where you're swiping too fast, half paying attention, and suddenly you've matched with someone you're not sure you'd have chosen if you were fully focused. His profile wasn't bad, just vague. A couple gym photos, one with a car, and a bio that basically said he liked adventure. That word always makes me suspicious, but I figure I'd give him a shot. He messaged almost right away, and we started talking. He wasn't super funny, but he was consistent. He actually asked questions and didn't just reply with one-word answers, which put him ahead of a lot of other guys on the app. He suggested we grab food, and even though I wasn't sure about him, I agreed. Sometimes people are different in person than online, so I wanted to see for myself. We met at a diner. Nothing fancy, just one of those spots with laminated menus and servers who already know the regulars. He showed up in a hoodie and jeans, and the first thing I noticed was that he looked more intense in person than in his photos. Not bad looking, just serious. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I brushed it off and sat down. At first, everything was normal. We ordered burgers, started chatting, and he told me about his job. He said he worked construction but was between projects right now, which sounded like a polite way of saying unemployed, but I let it slide. He asked me about school, about my hobbies, and I thought, okay, maybe this will just be a regular average date. Then halfway through the meal, he dropped it. Out of nowhere, while talking about past relationships, he casually mentioned that he had a few restraining orders against him. He said it like someone might mention they'd read a bad Yelp review, just completely casual. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. I wasn't even sure I heard him right at first. He kept going, though. He said they were all misunderstandings. His tone was so nonchalant it made my skin crawl. He said one girl accused him of stalking, but all he was doing was checking up on her. Another claimed he wouldn't stop showing up at her work, but he swore he was just trying to talk things out. He brushed it off like it was all just people being dramatic. The more he talked, the worse it got. He laughed about how easy it was to get slapped with a restraining order these days, like it was just paperwork people use when they were mad. He said girls always overreact, and that none of it meant anything. He even joked that he probably had more restraining orders than speeding tickets, which he thought was hilarious. Meanwhile, I was sitting there trying to stay calm while my brain screamed at me to get out. Every story he told made him sound more unstable. He framed himself as the victim, saying people didn't understand him, but between the lines, it was clear he couldn't handle rejection. He leaned closer and said people always misunderstood his passion. That word stuck with me, passion. To him, obsession was an obsession. It was just in caring too much. He made it sound romantic, but everything about it came off wrong. It felt like he was trying to convince me that his behavior was actually a good thing, like he was testing me to see if I buy into his version of events. I barely touched my food after that. He kept talking, I nodded along, but my mind was elsewhere. I was already planning my exit, figuring out the quickest way to end the night without setting him off. When the check came, he grabbed it, which under normal circumstances would have been a nice gesture. But in that moment, it just made me feel trapped. I thanked him, forced a smile, and said I had to get up early the next morning. He seemed fine with it, even walked me out. But the way he stood there watching me as I left sent a chill down my spine. Later that night, he texted me. He said he had a good time and wanted to see me again. I stared at the message, debating what to do. I didn't want to respond, didn't want to open that door even a crack. I left it on read and didn't reply. A day later, he messaged again, this time just a question mark. I blocked his number and unmatched him. For days after, I kept replaying the date in my head. The way he said it so casually, the way he laughed about something so serious. It made me wonder how many other people had sat across from him, hearing the same lines. I thought about those girls he mentioned, the ones who got restraining orders. At first, I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt, thinking maybe it really was messy breakups. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized they probably had good reasons. The part that stuck with me the most was how normal everything seemed at the start. He wasn't creepy right away. He was just another guy talking about his job, asking about my life, smiling over burgers. If he hadn't decided to brag about the restraining orders, I might have walked away thinking he was just boring, not dangerous. That thought unsettled me more than anything. After a while, I stopped thinking about him every day, but every once in a while, something would remind me. Like passing by the diner we went to, or hearing someone casually mention restraining orders in a conversation. It was one of those dates that leaves a mark, not because it was dramatic in the moment, but because of what it revealed after. And that was Ben, the guy who treated restraining orders like funny stories and thought obsession was just passion misunderstood. I'll be real. Money is the last thing I ever want to talk about on a first date. It always feels awkward when people bring up salaries or brag about what they buy. I'd rather talk about music, random shows, or even bad childhood stories before we dive into income. But apparently, Megan didn't feel the same way. Her profile gave me no warning about what was coming. It was full of travel pictures, sunsets, and that one classic shot of her pretending to hold up the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Her bio was short, just saying she liked ambitious people. That could mean a million things, but I didn't think much of it at the time. She messaged me first, asking about my favorite vacation spot, and from there the conversation flowed pretty easily. She wasn't overly flirty, but she kept the chat going without me having to carry it, which was refreshing. We decided to meet at a new cafe in the middle of town. It was one of those places that try to be trendy with mismatched furniture, big chalkboard menus, and plants hanging everywhere. When I walked in, she was already seated at a corner table with a latte in front of her. She waved me over and gave a bright smile, the kind that almost feels rehearsed, but still warm enough to pass as genuine. The first few minutes were normal. We talked about travel, school, random stuff. She told me about her favorite trips, and I told her about mine. And for a little while, I thought this might be one of those rare smooth dates. But then the conversation shifted. It started with her asking what I do for work. That's not unusual, so I told her. Then she followed up immediately with, "How much do you make?" I laughed at first, thinking she was joking, but her face stayed serious. She wanted a number. I hesitated to give a vague answer, but she kept pushing. She wanted specifics. Finally, I told her a ballpark figure just to move the conversation along, but she didn't let it go. Instead, she leaned back, folded her arms, and said she only dates people who earn more than her father. I thought I misheard, but she repeated it. She said her dad set the standard for what a real man should provide, and if someone couldn't top that, then she wasn't interested. She even read me my reaction like she was proud of setting such a high bar. The rest of the date turned into her grilling me about finances. She asked if I owned a car, if I was saving for a house, how much debt I had. She wanted to know if I invested, if I had stocks, if I planned on retiring early. It wasn't a conversation anymore. It was an interrogation. Every answer I gave, she either nodded like I'd passed a test or frowned like I'd failed. What made it worse was how casual she was about it. She didn't act embarrassed or shy. She talked like it was the most natural thing in the world, like money was the only thing that mattered in deciding if someone was worth dating. She even said she'd broken up with a guy once because he didn't make enough, and she didn't regret it. I sat there sipping my drink, trying to keep my face neutral while inside I was boiling. I wasn't mad that she had standards. Everyone does. But the way she made it sound, love, personality, compatibility, none of that mattered. The only question she cared about was the size of your paycheck. By the time we finished our drinks, I knew there was no point in trying to salvage the night. She wasn't looking for a partner. She was looking for an ATM. When the bill came, I grabbed it just to end things quickly, but she didn't even say thank you. She just smiled like it was expected. Walking out of the cafe, she casually mentioned that she'd text me later to compare notes. I gave a half smile, nodded, and went the opposite direction. I already knew I wouldn't answer. That night, I sat on my couch thinking about the whole thing. Usually when a date goes bad, it's because of awkward silences or lack of chemistry. But this felt different. This felt transactional, like I was being interviewed for a job I didn't even apply for. It was exhausting and honestly a little dehumanizing. The next morning, she texted. She thanked me for the coffee and then went straight into asking more money questions. She wanted to know if I'd be open to sharing exact numbers about my savings. That was it for me. I blocked her right then and there. Over the next few weeks, I told the story to a couple of friends. One of them laughed and said at least she was upfront, which I guess is true. But being upfront doesn't make it any less gross. Another friend said maybe her dad spoiled her, and she couldn't see past the idea of being provided for. Whatever the reason, it didn't make it any easier to swallow. The thing that stuck with me was her tone. She wasn't mean, she wasn't rude, but she also wasn't human about it. Everything she said was wrapped up in numbers, comparisons, and expectations. There was no warmth, no real curiosity about me as a person. Just a checklist she was running through in her head, probably read from a script she'd memorized. I realized later that her bio made more sense than I thought. That word, ambitious, it wasn't about goals or passion. For her, it meant money. Ambition wasn't about chasing dreams. It was about income brackets. And if you weren't over her father's, you didn't qualify. I never heard from her again after blocking her, but sometimes I wonder how many people she's grilled the same way. How many guys sat across from her at some cafe, answering question after question, only to be dismissed because their number didn't measure up. And that was Megan, the girl who turned a first date into a financial audit and who believed love could be calculated by comparing paychecks. The thing about dating apps is you never really know what version of someone you're gonna meet. People can look normal in pictures, sound decent in texts, and then completely blindside you in person. That's exactly what happened with Alex. His profile looked fine, basic selfies, one shot of him at a concert, and a bio that said something generic like looking for good vibes. Nothing about it screamed red flag, so when we matched and he messaged me right away, I figured I'd give it a shot. We talked for a couple of days, mostly about food and music. He kept things light, didn't seem pushy, and honestly came off kind of charming. He suggested we meet at this cafe downtown that I'd been wanting to try. It had this artsy feel, big windows, paintings on the walls, and a barista who always looked like they hated being there. I thought it'd be the perfect spot for a chill first date. I got there a few minutes early, grabbed a table near the window, and waited. Alex showed up right on time, which surprised me because most people are late at least a little. He looked like his pictures, maybe even better in person. Tall, clean cut, put together. I thought, okay, maybe this won't be a disaster. He sat down, flashed a big smile, and before we even ordered, he pulled out his phone and said we needed to take a picture together. At first, I thought he was joking. I kind of laughed it off, but he leaned in closer and opened his camera. He was serious. He said he wanted a picture of us right away, like some kind of proof. I hesitated, but before I could really process it, he was already snapping selfies. He took a couple, grinning like we'd been dating for months, while I just sat there awkwardly smiling. Then they got worse. He opened Instagram on the spot, edited the picture, and posted it with a caption about new beginnings and a heart emoji. I stared at him, stunned. We hadn't even ordered drinks yet, and he was broadcasting us as if we were already a couple. He didn't ask if I was okay with it. He didn't even check to see if I minded. He just did it, like it was normal. I tried to laugh it off and asked why he was posting so soon. That's when he dropped the real reason. He admitted that his ex still followed him online, and he wanted her to see he'd moved on. He said it casually, like it was no big deal, but inside I felt this wave of discomfort. I realized I wasn't a date to him. I was a prop. He wanted me to play the role of his new partner just so he could make his ex jealous. The drinks finally came, but the mood was ruined for me. While I was sipping my coffee, he kept checking his phone, watching the likes and comments roll in. Every time someone commented, he grinned and showed me like I should be excited too. He even pointed out that his ex had viewed the story, and he looked way too pleased about it. I tried steering the conversation towards something normal, asking about his job, his hobbies, but he barely answered. All he wanted to talk about was his ex, how she did him wrong, how she would regret leaving him, how posting us together was going to teach her a lesson. It was nonstop. I started to feel invisible, like I was just a stand-in character in a play he was directing. By the time we finished our drinks, I knew I wasn't staying for food. I told him I had something to do later and needed to head out. He didn't look bothered. He just kept smiling at his phone, clearly more invested in the reactions online than in me sitting across from him. He walked me out, tried to put his arm around me like we were already together, and I had to subtly step aside. That night, my phone buzzed with notifications. He had tagged me in the post, which meant all my friends and family could see it too. The caption made it look like we were in a full-blown relationship. My phone started blowing up with messages from people asking who he was. I was mortified. We'd known each other for less than 2 hours, and he'd already plastered me online as his new partner. I untagged myself immediately and texted him, telling him it wasn't okay. He brushed it off, saying I was overreacting and that it was just for fun. He even sent me screenshots showing his ex had watched the story again, as if that somehow made it worth it. I didn't reply. The next morning, I blocked him on everything. For a while after, I kept thinking about how weird it was that he'd been so smooth in messages, so normal leading up to the date, and then flipped into this strange performance in person. It made me realize how easy it is to get sucked into someone else's drama without even realizing it. If he hadn't been so obvious, I might have ended up seeing him again, not knowing I was just a pawn in his game against his ex. I told my friends about it later, and they couldn't stop laughing. One of them even found the post before I untagged myself and teased me about being Instagram official with a guy I'd barely met. I laughed along, but deep down it bugged me. It wasn't funny to feel like someone had taken control of my image like that. What still sticks with me is that moment when he first pulled out his phone. The date hadn't even started yet. We hadn't even ordered drinks, but he already knew why he wanted me there, and it had nothing to do with me. That realization hit harder than anything else. And that was Alex. The guide would turn a first date into a stage photo shoot just to get back at his ex. The date with Cindy started out like one of those things you agree to just because you're bored and don't want to spend another night scrolling on your phone. Her profile wasn't anything groundbreaking. A couple pictures of her at brunch, one of her with a dog, and some generic quote about living life to the fullest. Nothing about it screamed red flag. She messaged me first, asked if I liked sushi, and just like that, we made plans. We decided to meet at this casual sushi spot near the mall. It wasn't fancy, more of a conveyor belt type place where you could just grab plates as they came by. When I got there, Cindy was already waiting outside. She waved and smiled, and right away she seemed friendly enough. She looked like her photos, maybe a little more dressed down, but I wasn't complaining. We went inside, grabbed a booth, and started talking. The first half hour was normal. She told me about her job, her favorite shows, how she liked to travel when she had time off. She was chatty, which made things easier, and I thought maybe this would actually be a solid night. I was grabbing plates off the belt, nodding along, and then out of nowhere, she dropped it. She leaned back, sipped her drink, and casually said, "So I should probably tell you I'm pregnant," just like that. No build-up, no hesitation. I nearly choked on my sushi. She said it so calmly, like she was telling me her favorite color. I froze, trying to process it. She laughed at my face and explained she wasn't looking for the father. Apparently, he was already out of the picture. She said she was just on Tinder to test men. Her exact words were that she wanted to see who might make a good stepdad. She said dating while pregnant was a great way to weed out the guys who only wanted something casual. I didn't even know how to respond. On one hand, I respected her honesty. She could have easily hidden it, but she laid it all out there. On the other hand, I felt like I'd been thrown into an audition I didn't sign up for. She started asking me questions that felt less like date questions and more like an interview for a job. Did I like kids? Did I plan on having kids of my own someday? How stable was my career? What were my thoughts on long-term commitment? The more she talked, the clearer it became that this wasn't really about us connecting. She was running me through a checklist. She even mentioned that she'd brought up her pregnancy on other dates, and half the guys bailed immediately. She smirked and said if I stuck around, it meant I had potential. Meanwhile, I was sitting there thinking about how I had walked in expecting a casual sushi night and end up being evaluated as a possible step-parent. It was surreal. She wasn't rude about it, but the way she framed everything made me feel like I was being sized up. Every answer I gave seemed to be weighed, measured, and recorded in her head. At one point, she asked if I'd be okay dating someone who already had a baby on the way. I paused, because honestly, I didn't know. I hadn't even considered that possibility before. She read my hesitation and said, "See, most guys aren't cut out for it." It didn't feel like a conversation anymore. It felt like I was failing a test she already knew I'd fail. The food kept coming around on the belt, but I lost my appetite. I pushed plates away while she happily grabbed another roll. chatting about how she planned to raise her kid and what kind of school she wanted them to go to. She sounded like she'd already planned the next 18 years, and I was just being slotted in as a possible supporting character. When the check came, I paid my share and didn't argue. She smiled, thanked me, and then asked if I wanted to walk around the mall with her. I made up an excuse about needing to get up early, and we said goodbye. She gave me a quick hug before heading off, completely unfazed. Later that night, she texted me. She thanked me for not running away when she told me about the pregnancy and said she thought I seemed like I had good qualities. She even added a winking emoji, which somehow made it worse. I didn't reply. The next morning, I blocked her, not because she was a terrible person. Honestly, she wasn't. She was straightforward, confident, maybe even admirable in her honesty. But I wasn't ready to be thrown into something that heavy with a stranger I'd just met. I'd gone in expecting light conversation and a few laughs, not a trial run for fatherhood. Over the next week, I kept replaying the night in my head. I told a couple of friends about it, and they couldn't believe it. One of them joked that she was basically running job interviews over sushi. Another said at least she didn't hide it until later, which is true. But still, it felt unfair to be blindsided like that. What stuck with me the most was how casual she was. No nerves, no awkwardness. She owned it. She wasn't looking for sympathy or hiding anything. She just dropped it on the table like it was nothing. I couldn't decide if that made her bold or just reckless. I didn't regret going. It made for a wild story, one I'll probably be telling for a long time. But it also made me more cautious. Every time I match with someone now, I can't help but wonder what kind of secret bombshell they might be sitting on, waiting to drop halfway through the meal. And that was Cindy, the girl who turned a sushi date into an audition for stepdad material, all while casually eating rolls like it was just another night out. I wasn't even in the mood to swipe that night, but boredom has a way of pulling you back into the app whether you want to or not. That's when Daniel's profile popped up. He had that safe look, clean haircut, button-down shirt in half the pictures, and a big grin that made him look like he'd never been late to anything in his life. His bio said something about being family-oriented, which usually means nothing, but I figured I'd give him a chance. We matched, and he messaged me almost instantly. That should have been my first clue. He wasn't flirty, he wasn't trying to be funny, he just went straight into asking questions about me. At first, it seemed normal. He asked where I grew up, what kind of work I do, what hobbies I had. I thought maybe he was just curious, maybe even nervous, so I played along. After a couple of days, he asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. We picked this quiet little shop not far from my place, one of those cozy spots with couches in the corner and indie music playing a little too loud. I showed up on time, and he was already there, sitting at a table with his drink in hand. He stood up, shook my hand like it was a business meeting, and then sat back down. That was the vibe right away. Formal, almost stiff. We ordered our drinks and started talking, but pretty quickly the questions shifted. He didn't ask about my favorite shows or what kind of music I liked. Instead, he dove straight into my family. He wanted to know if I had siblings, what my parents did for work, if my grandparents were still around. At first, I thought he was just one of those people who loves family talk, but the way he pressed for details felt strange. He asked what my dad did for a living, and he asked about my mom, and he asked if they owned their house or rented. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off, but he didn't let it go. He leaned in, eyes sharp, like he was trying to memorize every detail. He wanted to know where they worked, how long they'd been there, if they had savings. It felt less like a date and more like a background check. I tried to change the subject a couple of times, but he always circled back. He asked what neighborhood my parents live in, if they travel often, if they have any businesses. It was relentless. He barely talked about himself. The only things he shared were surface level, where he went to school, a vague mention of working in finance, but nothing specific. Everything else was focused on me and my family. At one point, he even asked if my parents had ever talked about inheritance. My jaw literally dropped. Who asked that on a first date? I gave a vague answer and tried to laugh it off, but inside I was uncomfortable. He smiled, nodded like he just checked another box, and moved on to asking about cousins and uncles. The longer it went on, the more obvious it became that he wasn't interested in me. He was interested in who I was connected to. He didn't care about my favorite food, or what I did on weekends, or what music I listened to. He cared about whether my family had money. It hit me about halfway through the date that he probably wasn't looking for a partner. He was looking for a shortcut. He wanted someone with wealthy parents so he could latch onto that lifestyle. And the way he asked the questions, so directly and without hesitation, told me he'd done this before. I barely finished my coffee before saying I had to head out. He didn't look disappointed, just nodded and said he'd text me later. On the way home, I felt uneasy. I replayed all the questions in my head, realizing how much personal information I had already given up without thinking. I hadn't given him anything too specific, but still, it felt invasive. Later that night, he texted me thanking me for sharing so much. That phrase alone gave me chills. He said he liked how open I was and that he wanted to see me again soon. I didn't reply. The next morning, I had matched him and blocked his number. A few days later, I told the story to a friend, and she said it sounded like he was basically scouting for someone with a rich family. That's exactly how it felt. Like he was interviewing me for a position I didn't know I'd applied for. It wasn't about personality or attraction. It was about money and connections. The thing that stuck with me was how calm he was the whole time. He didn't act embarrassed or sneaky. He wasn't fumbling or nervous. He asked those questions like they were completely normal. That's what made it worse. He genuinely believed it was fine to drill someone about their family's finances on a first date. For a while after, I was extra careful when people asked about my family. I realized how easy it is to slip into oversharing when you're trying to keep a conversation going. Most people probably don't have bad intentions, but after Daniel, I couldn't help but be cautious. In the end, it wasn't dramatic. He didn't yell, he didn't get angry, he didn't make a scene. But sometimes the quieter dates are the ones that stick with you the most. The ones where you realize the person across from you had an agenda the whole time. And that was Daniel, the guy who turned coffee into a financial interrogation and who saw family trees as dollar signs instead of people. I didn't even expect to match with Sophia, to be honest. Her profile gave off that kind of polished vibe, like she'd spent way too much time curating it. Every picture was staged, standing in front of some mural, sitting at a rooftop bar with a cocktail, posing on a hiking trail in brand new looking gear. Usually I swipe left on that because it feels like someone's auditioning for a travel magazine, but something about her smirk in one of the photos made me curious enough to swipe right. A couple minutes later, she matched, and I figured why not see where it goes. She messaged first, which already set her apart. She had this quick, sarcastic style, making jokes that were just sharp enough to keep me on my toes. It wasn't the kind of conversation where you feel like you're pulling teeth. She kept it flowing. After a couple days, she suggested grabbing drinks at this bar downtown. I agreed, thinking at the very least it would be a decent night out. The bar was one of those dimly lit spots with neon signs, a jukebox in the corner, and a mix of college kids and older regulars. I got there first, grabbed a table near the back, and waited. When she walked in, she turned heads. She had this confident stride like she owned the place. She looked like her pictures, maybe a little more striking in person, but the way she carried herself made it hard not to notice her. She sat down across from me, ordered a drink right away, and started talking like we'd known each other for years. At first, it was great. She was funny, quick-witted, and seemed interested in what I had to say. But as the night went on, little comments started slipping out. She glanced at my shirt and laughed, saying it looked like something her dad would wear. I brushed it off with a smile, but inside it stung a little. Then she commented on my shoes, asking if I bought them on sale. I tried to laugh along, but she kept picking at small things, my hair, my watch, even the way I sat. It wasn't playful teasing, it was cutting, like she wanted to see how much I could take. I asked her about her job, her hobbies, trying to shift the focus, and that's when she dropped something that threw me off completely. She said she doesn't really take Tinder seriously. She uses it as practice. She explained that she likes going on dates just to test things out, her outfits, her jokes, the way she carries herself, so that when she's with someone she actually cares about, she's already polished. I sat there stunned. She was literally telling me that was nothing more than rehearsal. She wasn't interested in me. She was interested in refining her performance for someone else. She said it so casually, sipping her drink like it was the most normal thing in the world. The more she talked, the clearer it became. She said she liked to test different personalities on different guys to see what worked best. Sometimes she'd act sweet, sometimes aloof, sometimes flirty, all just to see the reactions. She said it was like doing trial runs for her real relationships. And then she smirked and told me not to take it personally. But how could I not? I was sitting there realizing I wasn't on a real date at all. I was part of her experiment, a practice dummy so she could perfect her act. It made everything she said earlier feel fake. Every laugh, every smile. It wasn't about connecting with me. It was about rehearsing for whoever she actually wanted to impress. I tried to play it cool, nodding along, but inside I felt like an idiot. I thought we were vibing, but she probably already decided before she even walked in that I was just another run. When the check came, she pulled out her card before I could even reach for mine. She said it was only fair since I was basically helping her out. The way she phrased it made it sound like I'd just done her a favor by sitting there. I didn't argue. Honestly, I just wanted the night to end. We walked out, and she gave me a quick hug before strutting off without looking back. On the way home, my phone buzzed with a text from her. She thanked me for the practice session and said I was a good sport. She even added a laughing emoji, like the whole thing was just some kind of inside joke. I stared at the screen for a while, then deleted the conversation and unmatched her. For days afterward, it kept bugging me. Not because I liked her, but because of how disposable I felt. I wasn't even given the chance to be seen as myself. I was just a warm-up act, one of probably dozens she cycled through to sharpen her performance. It made me wonder how many other guys had sat across from her, thinking it was a real date, while she was just taking mental notes for someone else. I told the story to a friend later and he laughed, saying at least she was honest about it. Maybe she was, but that honesty didn't make it sting any less. There's something rough about realizing someone looked at you and decided you weren't worth the real version of themselves. What stuck with me the most was how normal she made it sound. No guilt, no hesitation, just pure confidence in her system. She believed practicing on strangers was smart, even admirable, and maybe for her it worked. But for me, it was one of the most hollowed dates I'd ever sat through. And that was Sophia, the girl who turned dating into rehearsal, who used strangers as practice runs, and who made me feel like I'd been cast in a role I didn't even audition for. You ever go on a date where things seem fine at first, and then out of nowhere, the other person just drops something so wild that you sit there wondering if you heard it right? That was Brent. The whole thing started on a random Sunday afternoon when I was bored and swiping. His profile looked average. Selfies at the gym, a picture with a dog, and a bio that just said, looking for something real. Nothing about it jumped out, but nothing screamed red flag either, so when he matched and messaged me, I figured I'd give it a shot. Our conversation was decent. He was straightforward, not super funny, but not boring either. He asked what I was into, told me about some of his hobbies, and after a couple of days, he suggested grabbing a drink. We picked a pub not far from where I live, the kind of place with wooden tables, sports on TV, and a menu full of wings and burgers. I didn't expect much, but I thought, okay, at least it'll be a chill night. When I got there, Brent was already waiting outside. He smiled when he saw me and gave me a quick hug. He looked like his pictures, muscular, clean-cut, decent style. We went in, found a table, and ordered drinks. The first part of the date went smooth. We talked about work, favorite movies, dumb stories from school. It was easy, nothing forced. I remember thinking, maybe this will actually be normal. But then, after only one drink, he leaned forward with a serious look and asked me to delete my Tinder account. I laughed at first because I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. He said he doesn't date people who still keep backup options. He wanted me to prove right then and there that I was serious about him. I blinked, trying to process what he was asking. We'd been sitting together for maybe 40 minutes, and he wanted me to erase the whole app, basically committing to him on the spot. I tried to brush it off with a joke, but he kept pressing. He pulled out his phone and said he'd delete his account in front of me if I did the same. He said that was the only way he could feel secure. His tone wasn't angry. It was calm, steady, almost rehearsed, like he'd done this before. The more he talked, the more uncomfortable I felt. He framed it as some kind of loyalty test. He said people waste too much time juggling options, and if you're serious, you cut everyone else off immediately. I pointed out that we didn't even know each other yet, and he shrugged like that didn't matter. To him, deleting the app was proof of intention, and without that, there was no point in continuing. I sat there, sipping my drink slowly, trying to decide how to handle it. Part of me wanted to get up and leave right then, but another part of me was curious to see how far he'd push it. So I stayed quiet, nodding while he laid out his philosophy like it was some kind of dating gospel. He said most people are cowards when it comes to commitment, and that's why he lays it all out early. He said he doesn't care if it scares people away because that just means they weren't serious. The way he spoke was so intense, so absolute, that it gave me chills. He wasn't raising his voice, but there was something about his certainty that felt heavy. When the waiter came back to ask if we wanted another round, I said no. Brent shook his head too, but not because he was done talking. He leaned back, folded his arms, and asked me again, was I ready to delete my account? I told him I wasn't comfortable making that kind of decision on a first date. He smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind of smile people give when they think they're winning an argument. He said, that tells me everything I need to know. The rest of the night was tense. We made a little small talk, but it felt forced. He wasn't really listening anymore. He'd already decided I failed his test. When the check came, I reached for my wallet, but he grabbed it first. He paid without saying a word, then stood up like the night was over. Walking out of the pub, he gave me a quick side hug and said, good luck out there. His tone made it clear he didn't mean it. It felt more like a dismissal than a goodbye. I watched him walk off into the parking lot, phone already in his hand, probably lining up his next test subject. That night, I sat on my couch replaying everything. It wasn't even the demand to delete Tinder that stuck with me the most. It was the way he acted like it was normal, like he genuinely believed you could force commitment out of someone you just met over one drink. It made me wonder how many other people had been put through the same thing. The next day, I told a couple of friends, and their reactions were split. One said it sounded like he had control issues and I dodged a bullet. Another said maybe he just had strong boundaries. But to me, it didn't feel like boundaries. It felt like an ultimatum. Not a conversation, not a compromise, just his way or nothing. I never heard from him again, and honestly, I didn't expect to. He wasn't looking for a partner. He was looking for someone willing to follow his script. And that was Brent, the guy who wanted me to delete my account before we even finish our first round of drinks. Some dates start off weird right away, but with Madison, it wasn't like that. In fact, at the beginning I thought she might actually be one of the more normal people I'd met from the app. Her profile wasn't overly polished, just a mix of grouped shots with friends, a picture of her at the beach, and one mirror selfie that looked like it was taken in a hurry. Her bio was short, just saying she liked road trips and trying new food. Nothing about it screamed red flag, and when we matched, she messaged me first, asking if I'd ever been to this new burger place in town. We decided to go there for the first date. The restaurant was one of those trendy spots with chalkboard menus and wooden benches instead of booths. When I walked in, she was already at the counter ordering fries. She waved me over, and I noticed right away she looked pretty much like her pictures, just a little shorter than I expected. She had this confident energy about her, like she knew exactly what she was doing. We grabbed a table by the window, and at first, the conversation was easy. She was funny, sarcastic in a good way, and talked about random stuff like movies, traveling, and music. For the first 30 minutes, I thought, okay, this could actually be decent. She laughed at my jokes, asked me questions, and didn't stare at her phone every 5 seconds. Compared to other dates I've been on, it felt smooth. But somewhere around the middle of the meal, she casually dropped something that made me stop mid-bite. She said she had 3 boyfriends. Just like that. No hesitation, no build-up, just straight up. She even smirked like she was waiting for my reaction. I sat my burger down and asked what she meant, thinking maybe she was joking. But she wasn't. She explained that she'd met all 3 of them on Tinder, and each one lived in a different city. She said she liked to keep things interesting by juggling them, making sure none of them knew about the others. She bragged about how good she was at keeping everything hidden. Different schedules, different stories, different excuses. I sat there staring at her, trying to figure out if this was some kind of test. But the more she talked, the clearer it became that she wasn't making it up. She went into detail about how one boyfriend lived 2 hours away, another lived closer, and the third lived out of state but visited often. She described how she managed her time, how she rotated weekends, and how none of them suspected a thing. She said it like she was proud of herself, like it was an accomplishment. The part that got me the most was how casual she was about it. She wasn't nervous, she wasn't trying to justify it, she was bragging. She leaned back, sipped her drink, and grinned while explaining how much fun it was. She said she liked the thrill of it, seeing how long she could keep everything going without slipping up. I barely touched my food after that. She kept talking, going on about how one boyfriend always bought her gifts, another was more emotional, and the third was adventurous. She said she liked having all three because she didn't have to settle for just one type of person. Each one filled a different role. She called it having the best of all worlds. At one point, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "You probably be number 4 if you can keep up." My stomach turned. She wasn't just telling me about her boyfriends. She was testing me, seeing if I'd be willing to join her little roster. The rest of the night dragged. I nodded along, but inside I was counting the minutes until I could leave. When the check came, she didn't even pretend to reach for it. I paid, mostly just to speed things up, and we walked outside. She gave me a quick hug, told me she had fun, and said she'd text me later. On the way home, I kept shaking my head, trying to process it. I wasn't even mad, just baffled. She had laid it all out there so boldly, like it was completely normal to juggle 3 boyfriends, and then invite a fourth into the mix. It made me wonder how many other people she'd told this to, or if I was just unlucky enough to hear it. Later that night, she did text me. She sent a message saying I seemed cool, and that she thought I could handle her lifestyle. I didn't reply. The next morning, I had matched her and deleted the chat. Over the next week, I told the story to a couple friends, and their reactions were all over the place. Some laughed and said she sounded like a player who got a kick out of the chaos. Others said she was reckless and bound to get caught eventually. One friend even joked that I should have stuck around just to see how messy it would get. But honestly, I wanted nothing to do with it. The more I thought about it, the more it sank in how risky her game was. Juggling 3 boyfriends in 3 different cities wasn't just stressful, it was dangerous. At some point, one of them would find out, and things could explode. But she didn't seem to care. To her, it was all out the adrenaline rush, the thrill of hiding in plain sight. What stuck with me most was her grin, that confident, smug look she gave me while bragging about keeping secrets. She wasn't worried, she wasn't guilty, she was proud. That look burned into my head more than anything she said. And that was Madison, the girl who collected boyfriends like trophies, who thrived on keeping secrets, and who saw me as nothing more than a potential addition to her lineup. I met Chris on one of those nights when I wasn't even planning to use the app. You know the kind. You're just lying there scrolling because you can't sleep, not really expecting anything to come from it. His profile wasn't flashy, but it had just enough personality to stand out. A picture of him holding a guitar, one of him hiking, and a bio that said something simple about liking to cook. Nothing that screamed trouble. When we matched, he messaged first. He was smooth, kind of funny, and honestly easy to talk to. The conversation flowed better than most, and within a day or two, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I figured sure, why not? We met at this little cafe downtown, one of those spots with brick walls, shelves of books nobody ever touched, and the smell of espresso hitting you the second you walked in. Chris was already there, sitting at a corner table with his phone in hand. When I walked up, he smiled big, stood to give me a quick hug, and pulled out the chair across from him. Right off the bat, he was charming. The first half of the date was easy. He talked about music, about growing up in the area, about random road trips he'd taken. He cracked jokes that made me laugh, and I actually felt comfortable. It wasn't forced. For once, it felt like 2 people just clicking. I remember thinking, okay, maybe this will actually go somewhere. But then, about halfway through, the tone shifted. Out of nowhere, Chris leaned back in his chair, grinned, and said he had a confession. I braced myself, not sure what he meant. That's when he told me that his favorite thing to do on Tinder was go on dates, pretend to be really interested, and then ghost the person afterward. He said it so casually, like he was telling me his favorite TV show. He explained that he loved the control it gave him. He said there was something satisfying about making someone think he was into them and then disappearing without a word. He laughed while saying it like it was some kind of game. At first, I thought maybe he was joking, but he wasn't. He started giving examples, times he'd gone on dates, made the girl think he was serious, then cut contact completely the next day. He said he liked watching how they reacted when they tried to reach out and he just ignored them. He called it ghosting for sport. I sat there in shock, trying not to let my face show how weirded out I was. He wasn't embarrassed at all. In fact, he seemed proud. He said he liked the power shift, how it felt like he was always the one in control. He even hinted that he might do it to me. He smirked, sipped his coffee, and said, "But who knows, maybe you'll be different." The rest of the date was ruined for me after that. I kept nodding along, but inside I was just uncomfortable. I felt like I was sitting across from someone who saw dating as a sport instead of something real. Every laugh, every smile from him after that just felt fake, like he was playing the way he played all the others. When we wrapped up, he insisted on paying for the coffee. Normally, I think that was sweet, but in this case, it felt more like part of the performance. Like he wanted to make sure I walked away thinking he was a great guy, only to ghost me later. As we walk outside, he gave me a quick hug, said he had a great time, and promised to text me later. His smile was wide, his tone convincing, but I knew exactly what was coming. Sure enough, when I got home, I texted him a simple thanks for the coffee. He didn't respond. The next day, nothing. I checked the app. He had unmatched me, just like that, gone. Even though I expected it, the whole thing still sat with me. It wasn't that I liked him. I didn't, not after his little confession. But it was the fact that he was so deliberate about it. He told me exactly what he was going to do, and then he did it. It was calculated, almost mechanical. Over the next week, I thought about how many people he must have done this to. How many girls had sat across from him, laughing at his jokes, thinking they'd found someone decent, only to end up talking to thin air the next day. And the fact that he got joy out of it made it even worse. He wasn't ghosting because he lost interest or because things didn't work out. He was ghosting because he liked the power. I told a friend about it later and she rolled her eyes, saying at least he was honest up front. Maybe that's true, but to me it felt cruel. It's one thing to ghost someone because you're not feeling it. It's another to turn it into a hobby, a twisted little game. The weirdest part is how normal he seemed at first. If he hadn't made that confession, I might have walked away thinking he was just another average guy. That thought stuck with me. How many people look perfectly normal on the surface but are hiding something messed up underneath? And that was Chris, the guy who turned ghosting into a sport, who treated dating like a game of control, and who made me realize how easy it is for some people to turn other people's feelings into entertainment. I wasn't even planning to meet Jessica at first. Her profile was one of those where you swipe without thinking, and then later wonder why. The pictures were all over the place, one in front of the bathroom mirror with the flash on, one blurry shot at a party, and another where she was holding a drink but half cut out of the frame. Her bio said something short like "Real men step up," which should have been a warning, but I ignored it. She messaged me first, which threw me off. Most of her texts were quick, nothing special, just enough to keep a conversation going. After a couple days, she asked if I wanted to grab dinner. I figured sure, why not? We picked a diner halfway between where we both live, one of those late night spots with bright lights, shiny booths, and menus that looked like they hadn't been updated in decades. I got there early, grabbed a booth, and waited. Jessica walked in a few minutes later, hair done up, wearing a short dress like she was headed to a club instead of a diner. She smiled when she saw me, slid into the booth across from me, and right away started talking. She had a loud, commanding voice, the kind that made people at nearby tables glance over. The start of the date was fine. We ordered food, made small talk about work, shows we were into, random things like that. She wasn't shy at all, which made things easy, but she had this way of talking that made it feel less like a conversation and more like a monologue. Still, I rolled with it, thinking maybe she was just nervous and overcompensating. The food came and we ate while she told me about her exes. She didn't hold back, she went into detail about how every one of them had failed her in some way. One didn't make enough money. Another didn't buy her gifts. Another didn't drive her places. She said it all with this attitude like she was keeping score. I nodded along, but in my head I was already questioning if I should have just stayed home. By the time we finished eating, I was ready to call it a night. I reached for the check, and she didn't even pretend to go for her wallet. I didn't mind covering it, but the entitlement in her expression rubbed me the wrong way. I paid, we got up, and headed outside. That's when the real issue started. She turned to me in the parking lot and asked if I was driving her home. I told her no, since she'd driven herself. She stared at me like I just insulted her. She said a real man never lets a woman drive herself home after a date, no matter what. She started raising her voice, saying it was my responsibility to make sure she got home safely. I was stunned. She had her car right there in the lot. I pointed to it, but she kept shaking her head, saying I should follow her, or better yet, she should ride with me while I drove her back, and I could Uber to get my car later. She acted like it was common sense, like this was what every guy should do. When I told her again that wasn't happening, she got heated. She crossed her arms and started going off about how men these days don't know how to treat women. She said paying for food wasn't enough, that I should have offered gifts, driven her there, and driven her back. She even said that on a proper date, the guy brings flowers, covers everything, and makes sure she doesn't lift a finger. I stood there in the parking lot, completely caught off guard, while she kept ranting. People walking by glanced at us, probably wondering what the argument was about. I kept calm, told her it was late and was heading out, and started walking toward my car. She shouted after me and calling me cheap and selfish, but I didn't turn around. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove off. Not even 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with texts from her. Long paragraphs about how I'd failed the bare minimum of being a man. She said I'd wasted her time, that she deserved someone who would treat her like a queen, and that I'd never find anyone with my attitude. I didn't respond. I just blocked her number and unmatched her. For the next couple days, I kept replaying it in my head. It wasn't the fact that she wanted me to cover the check or even that she expected me to be a gentleman. That's not unusual. It was the way she turned it into a demand, like a checklist of requirements that had nothing to do with actually connecting. She didn't care about me as a person. She cared about whether I could play the role she had built in her head. I told a few friends about it, and they all laughed. One said she sounded like she was stuck in the 1950s. Another said I should have just driven her to shut her up. But honestly, I didn't owe her that. If someone shows up to a date with a list of expectations longer than the menu, you're never going to meet them all anyway. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the date was doomed from the start. From the moment she started listing all the ways her exes had failed, I should have known I'd end up on the same list by the end of the night. It wasn't about who I was. It was about whether I could perform to her standards. And that was Jessica, the girl who measured men not by connection or chemistry, but by how much they could provide, drive, and spend, all before the first date was even over. The match with Yo happened on a lazy afternoon when I was half watching TV and half swiping. His profile didn't have much going on, just a few pictures of him at random restaurants. One selfie in a car, and a bio that only said, "Ask me anything." Normally I'd skip over a profile that vague, but for some reason I swiped right. A few minutes later it was a match. Our chat started off basic. He asked where I was from, what kind of food I liked, the usual surface level stuff. He wasn't funny, not really flirty, but he kept the conversation steady, which was more than I could say for half the other matches that week. After 2 days of short back and forth, he asked if I wanted to meet for dinner. I said sure. We picked a casual Thai spot not far from downtown. When I got there, Yo was waiting outside, scrolling on his phone. He looked up, smiled, and gave me a small wave. He looked like his pictures, maybe a bit older in person, but nothing too different. We went inside, grabbed a booth, and started looking at the menus. At first, the date was fine. We ordered food, talked about music, travel, and random things. He wasn't as stiff as he'd been over text. He actually laughed a couple times, which made things feel more natural. For the first half hour, I thought this might just be a normal, low-key dinner. But then, in the middle of eating, he leaned back, looked at me, and dropped it like it was nothing. He said he was married. I froze, chopsticks in hand, staring at him. He didn't look nervous or guilty. He said it calmly, like it was just a regular piece of information about himself. He followed it up by saying he used Tinder only to find people willing to be the side option. That was the phrase he used. Side option. My brain took a second to catch up. I asked if his wife knew, and he shrugged. He said she probably had her suspicions, but she didn't care enough to check. He said things at home were fine, but he liked meeting new people because it made him feel alive. The way he explained it made it sound like cheating wasn't a big deal to him. He talked about it like someone might talk about having a hobby, like picking up photography or trying out new restaurants. He said dating apps made it easy to keep things exciting without messing up his routine at home. I sat there stunned. He was so casual about it, so confident in the way he laid it out. He said some women didn't mind once he was honest, that they actually preferred being the side option because it meant less responsibility. He framed it like it was a win-win situation. He got the excitement, and they got the attention without the pressure of commitment. The rest of the meal felt like a blur. I picked at my food while he kept talking, laying out his philosophy like it was some kind of life advice. He said people put too much weight on monogamy, that marriage didn't mean what it used to, and that everyone just needed to accept that people stray. He didn't sound bitter. He sounded like someone who had convinced himself he was right. When the check came, he paid without hesitation, which almost made it worse. It was like he was trying to smooth things over with money, like buying dinner would somehow balance out the fact that he just admitted to being married. Outside, he smiled and asked if I wanted to hang out again sometime. I stared at him, wondering how he could even ask that with a straight face. I told him I wasn't interested and he just shrugged. He said, "Suit yourself," he'd be a little wave, and walked off like nothing happened. That night, I sat on my bed replaying it. Not just the moment he admitted it, but the way he'd said it. No hesitation, no shame, no guilt. Just flat out honesty about something most people would hide at all costs. It made me realize he'd probably done this dozens of times before, maybe even hundreds. I wasn't special. I was just another option he tested out. I told a couple friends about it, and their reactions were all over the place. Some said at least he was upfront, that it was better to know right away than be strung along. Others said it was gross that he was dragging strangers into his marriage drama. I agreed with both in a way. Yeah, he was honest, but the way he framed it made it clear he didn't care who got hurt in the process. What stuck with me wasn't just that he was married. It was that he seemed so practiced at the whole thing. He had his explanations ready, his lines rehearsed, his justifications polished. It wasn't messy or awkward. It was calculated, and that, more than anything, made my skin crawl. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the image of him sitting there across from me, calmly saying he was married while sipping his drink like it was no big deal. It wasn't just a betrayal to his wife. It was the way he made it sound normal. Like everyone should just accept that people cheat and move on. And that was Yo, the guy who looked me in the eye over pad thai and told me he was married, all while trying to recruit me to be his side option. The first time Eva showed up in my matches, I almost ignored her. Her profile was simple, maybe even a little boring. One picture of her with friends at a bar, another of her smiling in front of some mural, and a short bio that just said she liked loyal people. Nothing about it grabbed me, but I swiped right anyway, mostly out of curiosity. To my surprise, she matched right away and messaged first. Her messages were quick and to the point. No long jokes, no small talk about weather or TV shows, just questions like what I was doing that day or if I liked dogs. It wasn't the most exciting chat, but she seemed genuinely interested, so when she asked if I wanted to meet for dinner, I agreed. We picked this Italian place not far from downtown. It wasn't fancy, but definitely nicer than a diner. White tablecloths, candles on the tables, waiters in black aprons. I figured it'd be a nice, low-stress setting to get to know each other. When I got there, Ava was already at a table by the window. She looked like her pictures, maybe even better in person. Long hair, sharp eyes, and a confident vibe. She stood up to hug me, smiled, and for the first couple minutes, everything felt normal. We sat down, ordered drinks, and started talking about work and random hobbies. She laughed at a couple of my stories, and I thought, okay, maybe this will actually be a good night. But then, before our food even came, she leaned across the table and asked for my phone. At first, I thought she meant to show me something funny, maybe a meme or a song. But no, she said she wanted to check if I still had dating apps installed. I blinked, waiting for her to laugh and say she was joking, but she didn't. She held out her hand, dead serious, like this was just a normal thing people do on first dates. I kind of froze. I laughed awkwardly and asked if she was serious. She nodded and said she doesn't waste her time with people who keep backup options. She wanted me to prove I was serious about her by handing over my phone right there in the middle of the restaurant before we'd even gotten our appetizers. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to get up and leave, but another part of me was curious about how far she'd push it. I told her I wasn't comfortable with that, and she rolled her eyes. She said every guy always says that because they're hiding something. She said if I had nothing to hide, I'd just hand it over. Her tone was sharp, almost accusing, and suddenly the whole vibe of the date shifted. The laughter was gone. The casual conversation was gone. It turned into a test. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, staring at me like she was waiting for me to fail. The waiter came by with breadsticks, and she didn't even look at him. She just kept her eyes on me, tapping her fingers on the table. She repeated that she wasn't interested in wasting her time, that she only dates guys who cut ties with everyone else from the start. I tried to explain that it was too soon to be making demands like that. We barely knew each other. but she cut me off and said that's exactly why she needed proof. She said most guys string women along, juggling multiple matches, and she wasn't going to be one of them. The food finally arrived, but by then I'd lost my appetite. She dug into her pasta while still watching me, waiting for me to crack. Every few minutes, she'd circle back to the phone, asking if I changed my mind. It was relentless. At one point, she even offered to hand over her own phone first, just to show she was fair. She pulled it out, unlocked it, and slid it across the table. I didn't even touch it. I told her I wasn't interested in snooping through her stuff, but she smirked and said, "That's the difference between me and you." By the time we finished eating, I knew I was done. She asked again as we waited for the check, almost at a final chance to prove myself. I shook my head, and she sighed like she was disappointed. When the bill came, I paid just to get things over with. She didn't thank me. She just grabbed her purse, stood up, and said she didn't think this was going to work. I said fine, and we walked out in silence. She didn't even give me a hug goodbye. Later that night, she texted me one last time. She said she knew I was hiding something, and that was why I refused. She told me she only dates guys who have nothing to hide, and that I wasted her time. I didn't reply. I blocked her and deleted the chat. The whole thing stuck in my head for days, though. Not because I liked her. I did not after that. But because of how bold she was. She didn't see anything wrong with asking for someone's phone on the first date. She thought it was normal and even necessary. It made me wonder how many guys before me had actually handed theirs over just to avoid the argument. I told a few friends about it later, and they couldn't believe it. One said she sounded controlling. Another said maybe she'd been burned before and was paranoid. Whatever the reason, it didn't matter to me. I wasn't about to hand over my phone to a stranger just to pass some test. And that was Ava, the girl who demanded proof before the appetizers even hit the table, who wanted control before there was even a connection, and who turned a simple dinner into an interrogation. The way I ended up matching with Jordan wasn't even intentional. I was sitting in a coffee shop killing time between classes, just swiping because I was bored. His profile popped up and I almost kept going. His pictures looked harmless enough, one at the gym, one on a hiking trail, and one where he was holding a cup of coffee like it was a prop. His bio was short, curious about people. That was it. Something about it made me stop though, and I figured, all right, harmless curiosity can't be that bad. I swiped right, and we matched almost immediately. The first couple of messages were normal. He asked where I grew up, what kind of music I liked, if I had pets. Pretty standard stuff. But the way he worded things felt more like an interview than a conversation. Still, he was polite, and after a few days, he asked if I wanted to meet up. I didn't have any major plans that weekend, so I said sure. We met at this cafe near the park. It wasn't anything fancy, just a spot where people studied, worked on laptops, or grabbed a quick drink before heading out. I got there a little early, grabbed a small table, and waited. Jordan showed up 5 minutes later, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, and he gave me this big grin like we were already friends. We ordered drinks, sat down, and for the first 20 minutes, everything seemed fine. He asked about my job, my family, the usual. He listened intently, nodding a lot, even jotting something down on his phone at one point. I thought maybe he was making a note about a song I'd mentioned or something. But then, out of nowhere, he admitted something that flipped the whole mood. He leaned in and said he wasn't really on Tinder to date in the traditional sense. He said he was there to collect stories. I raised an eyebrow, not sure what he meant. He explained that he only dates people outside his cultural background because he likes to write about them online for his followers. He said he runs this blog where he compares different dating experiences, and people love reading about how unique it all is. I sat there stunned. He wasn't trying to meet people for connection. He was treating it like research. I asked if he at least changed people's names, and he shrugged, saying sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. He said the important part was the story, not the privacy. The more he explained, the more uncomfortable I got. He talked about past dates in detail, mentioning where people were from, what they ate, even quirks about how they spoke. He laughed about how one girl always mispronounced certain words, and how another introduced him to food he'd never tried before. He said his followers loved those little details. Meanwhile, all I could think was, am I going to be next? Is he already mentally drafting a blog post about me while I sit here sipping my coffee? The way he stared at me, waiting for me to say more about myself, made me feel like I was being mined for content. I tried to steer the conversation towards something lighter, but he kept pulling it back to culture. He asked me about my family's traditions, holidays, food we ate at home. He asked if I ever felt different growing up, if people treated me a certain way. It wasn't casual curiosity. It was targeted, like he was filling in blanks for an article. At one point, he even pulled out his phone and asked if he could take a picture of me for reference. I laughed nervously and said no, but he just smiled like it wasn't a big deal. He typed something into his notes app instead, and I could see lines of text already there, probably from other dates. The longer I sat there, the worse it felt. Every answer I gave felt like it wasn't really for him. It was for his audience. I wasn't a person he was trying to connect with. I was a character in his project, another piece of material to post online. When the drinks were finished, he asked if I wanted to take a walk in the park. Normally, I might have said yes, but I was already done. I made an excuse about needing to head out early, and he didn't seem bothered. He smiled, thanked me for sharing so much, and said he'd be in touch. Sure enough, later that night, I saw a notification. He had followed me on Instagram, and one of his recent posts was a long caption about the fascinating perspectives of cross-cultural dating. The details weren't exact, but a couple of things he mentioned sounded uncomfortably close to what I told him. My stomach sank. He hadn't even waited a full day before turning me into content. I blocked him right then, both on Instagram and on Tinder. I didn't want to see what else he might post. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Most bad dates are forgettable, but this one stuck because it felt invasive. It wasn't just a mismatch or awkward conversation. It was like my words, my life, were being collected and repackaged for strangers. It made me second guess how much I shared with people early on. When I told a couple friends, their reactions were a mix of disbelief and anger. One said it sounded exploitative, like he was using people for clout. Another joked that at least I was content-worthy, but even that made me feel gross. I didn't want to be anyone's project. The weirdest part is how calm and confident he was while admitting it. He didn't think it was wrong. He framed it like he was documenting experiences for the greater good, like he was some kind of cultural explorer instead of just a guy using dates for blog material. That self-justification, that certainty, is what bothered me most. And that was Jordan, the guy who turned dates into blog posts, who measured people by how well they'd fit into his stories, and who made me realize that sometimes you're not on a date at all, you're just being written about.